Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. Dennis Hartley thought his fresh start would be quiet and simple. A small house on a peaceful street where he could finally catch his breath after the divorce. But on his first morning, an elderly neighbor warned him about the old stone well in his front yard. "Don't go near that well. Just trust me." Dennis brushed it off as local superstition. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of him. He lifted the cover and lowered a rope into the darkness. What he pulled up was a sealed case filled with letters, photographs, and tape recordings of a family's secrets. Why would someone hide their most personal memories at the bottom of a well? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dennis Hartley had never imagined his life would lead him here, to a modest two-story house on Willow Creek Lane, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a duffel bag that had seen better days. At 45, he was starting over in a way that felt both liberating and terrifying. The divorce papers had been signed 6 months ago, the settlement fair and painfully civil. No screaming matches, no thrown plates, no dramatic accusations. Just 2 people who had looked at each other one morning and realized they'd become strangers, sharing an address. The house itself stood at the end of a quiet street, lined with oak trees that were just beginning to turn gold with autumn's arrival. It was older than he'd initially wanted, built sometime in the early 1980s, the realtor had said, but there was something honest about its aging dignity. The white paint was fading to cream in places, the shutters could use a fresh coat, and the front porch sagged slightly on one side, but it felt real, lived in, the kind of place where people had raised families, celebrated holidays, weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. Dennis stood on that porch now, keys in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up on his first full day. Across the street, a woman in her 70s tended roses with the careful attention of someone who'd been doing it for decades. 2 houses down, a young couple loaded a toddler into a car seat, their movements synchronized with the ease of practiced routine. Normal life unfolding at its own pace. The well sat in his front yard, about 15 feet from the porch, partially obscured by overgrown ivy and wildflowers that had claimed the space around it. It was made of stacked fieldstone, weathered smooth by time, with a heavy wooden cover reinforced by iron bands. The kind of well you'd see in a historical photograph, a relic from when this land was farmland instead of suburban lots. He'd noticed it during the walkthrough, of course. Had even asked about it. Decorative, the realtor had assured him. Sealed shut decades ago. Adds character, doesn't it? Dennis had agreed, thinking nothing more of it. Until that first morning, he'd been carrying boxes from his car when the elderly man from next door approached the fence line. The man moved slowly, deliberately, leaning on a carved walking stick that looked handmade. His face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from smiling often, though his expression now was serious. "Morning," Dennis had called out, setting down a box marked kitchen. The man nodded, his eyes drifting past Dennis to the well. "You're the new owner." "That's right. Dennis Hartley." He'd extended his hand over the fence. The handshake was firm despite the man's age. "Harold Bachman. Lived here since 1979. "Long time," Dennis had said, genuinely impressed. "Must have seen a lot of changes." "Some." Mr. Bachman's gaze hadn't left the well. Then, with a weight that made Dennis stop moving entirely, he'd said, "Don't go near that well. Just trust me." The words hung in the morning air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Is there something wrong with it?" Dennis had asked, suddenly concerned about liability, safety, property value. Mr. Bachman had shaken his head slowly. "Nothing like that. Just some things are better left alone, son. That's all I'll say." Before Dennis could ask anything else, the old man had turned and walked back toward his house, leaving Dennis standing there with a box of dishes and a head full of questions. That had been 3 weeks ago. In the time since, Dennis had settled into the house with the methodical care of someone who had nothing but time. He'd unpacked slowly, deliberately choosing where each item should go. The kitchen felt too big for one person, so he'd filled it with plants from the hardware store, herbs on the windowsill, a spider plant hanging above the sink. The living room held his old recliner, a bookshelf he'd had since college, and a television he rarely turned on. The bedroom upstairs overlooked the backyard, a small patch of grass bordered by a fence that needed mending. He'd set up his bed, hung his clothes in the closet, and placed a photograph on the nightstand. His children, Laurel and Trevor, taken 5 years ago at the beach. They were adults now, 23 and 21, living their own lives in cities, hours away. The divorce had been hardest on them, he thought, even though they'd been old enough to understand. Or maybe because they were old enough to understand. Laurel had called twice since he'd moved in. Brief conversations, mostly logistics. "How's the new place, Dad? Do you need anything?" "I'm swamped with work, but maybe I can visit next month." Her voice carried the same careful distance that had crept into their relationship over the past year. Not angry, just removed. Trevor communicated primarily through text messages. Short updates about his job, his roommate, the weather. Surface-level exchanges that said everything by saying nothing at all. Dennis tried not to take it personally. They were busy. They had their own lives. This was normal, wasn't it? Children grew up, moved away, built their own worlds. He should be happy they were independent, successful, healthy. Instead, he felt invisible. The neighborhood itself was friendly in that suburban way, where everyone waved, but nobody really talked. Mrs. Iris Keller, the woman with the roses, had brought over a plate of cookies his second day. They'd chatted briefly about the weather, the trees, the quiet nature of the street. She'd mentioned she was a widow, had been for 15 years, kept herself busy with her garden and her church group. The young couple next door, Preston was their last name, he'd learned from the mailbox, kept to themselves mostly. He'd see them coming and going, always in a hurry, always juggling work bags and a diaper bag, and the toddler who seemed to have infinite energy. This was his life now. Quiet, manageable, safe. So why did he feel like he was waiting for something? The well kept drawing his eye. Every morning when he had his coffee on the porch, he'd find himself looking at it. Every evening walk around the block, he'd pause before going inside, studying its weathered stones. Mr. Bachman's warning played on repeat in his mind. Don't go near that well. But why? What could possibly be dangerous about an old decorative well? It was sealed, according to the realtor. Probably just a hole filled with dirt by now. Yet Mr. Bachman's face had been so serious, so certain. Dennis found himself researching the property history online one evening, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of tea that had gone cold. The house had been built in 1981 by a contractor named Richard Brenner. It had changed hands 4 times since then, once in 1987, once in 1995, once in 2008, and then to him this year. No record of any accidents, no easement issues, no structural problems. Nothing that would explain a warning about an old well. He'd even walked over to Mr. Bachman's house a few days after moving in, intending to ask for clarification. But when the old man had answered the door, something in his expression, a mixture of sadness and stubbornness, had made Dennis change his mind. "Just wanted to thank you for the welcome," Dennis had said instead. "And to say I'm a quiet neighbor. Won't cause any trouble." Mr. Bachman had smiled then, the worry lines easing. "Appreciate that, son. You need anything, you just knock." But the unspoken understanding hung between them. Don't ask about the well. So Dennis hadn't. Instead, he'd built his routines around it. Morning coffee, avoiding looking directly at it. Evening walks, forcing himself not to pause. Late nights when he couldn't sleep, resisting the urge to go outside and really examine it. It was just a well, stone and wood and empty space, nothing more. The mailbox at the end of his driveway had been stuffed full when he'd first arrived, mostly junk mail and notices for the previous owner. He'd sorted through it all, recycling most of it, when he'd found something that made him pause. A letter, yellowed with age, still in its envelope. The address was this house, but the date on the postmark was September 1987. The envelope had never been opened. Someone had written, "Return to sender moved," across the front, but it had apparently stayed in the mailbox anyway, wedged behind the metal backing where it had remained for nearly 40 years. Dennis had opened it carefully, curious despite himself. Inside was a single page written in elegant cursive handwriting. "Dear Richard and Patricia, we were so sorry to hear about your move. The neighborhood won't be the same without you and the children. Please know that you are in our thoughts and prayers. Whatever challenges you face, we hope you find peace. With love, the Hendersons." It was the kind of generic condolence note neighbors send when someone moves away. Nothing unusual about it except for one phrase that had stuck with Dennis. Whatever challenges you face. What challenges? Why would a family moving to a new house need prayers for peace? He'd set the letter aside, but found himself thinking about it often. About the Brenners who'd built this house, lived here for only 6 years, and then left under circumstances mysterious enough to warrant that kind of careful sympathy. Tonight, 3 weeks into his new life on Willow Creek Lane, Dennis sat on his porch in the gathering dusk. The air was cooling, carrying the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. Leaves skittered across the street, making soft scratching sounds. The neighborhood was settling in for the evening, lights clicking on in windows, curtains being drawn, the day winding down. And the well sat there, silent and patient as it had for more than 40 years. Dennis sipped his beer, his one indulgence at the end of long, empty days, and tried to convince himself he wasn't curious, that Mr. Bachman's warning was enough to keep him away. But curiosity is a persistent thing, especially for someone with too much time alone and too many unanswered questions. He thought about the Brenners, about whatever had happened to make them leave, about why someone would seal a well instead of filling it in properly. The sun disappeared behind the roofline across the street, and Dennis finished his beer in the growing darkness. Just a well, just an old structure left over from another era, nothing more. He stood, stretched, and headed inside for the night, telling himself he'd stop thinking about it. But as he locked the door and turned off the porch light, he glanced back through the window one more time. The well was barely visible now, just a dark shape against darker shadows. Waiting. The call from Laurel came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into October. Dennis had been looking forward to it all day. They'd scheduled it earlier in the week, a proper conversation, instead of their usual rushed check-ins. He'd even made dinner instead of eating cereal, standing at the counter, setting a place at the table, like it mattered. His phone rang at 7 o'clock sharp. "Hey, Dad," Laurel's voice came through, and he could already hear the apology forming. "Listen, I'm so sorry, but something came up at work. We're dealing with this grant deadline, and I'm completely underwater. Can we reschedule for this weekend?" Dennis looked at his plate of pasta, still steaming. "Of course, honey. Work comes first. You're the best. I'll call you Saturday morning, I promise. Love you. Love you too." The line went dead before he could say anything else. Dennis sat at his kitchen table, alone with his dinner, and felt something crack inside his chest. Not break. He'd felt that sensation during the divorce. This was different, smaller, a hairline fracture that had been forming for months, finally becoming visible. He wasn't angry. Laurel was busy, genuinely busy with important work. This wasn't personal. But it felt personal. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing, then washed his single plate and fork. The kitchen was too quiet. The whole house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed muted, as if it too was trying not to disturb him. Dennis found himself at the back window, looking out into the yard, where darkness had already settled. He could just make out the fence line, the overgrown grass he kept meaning to mow, the shape of the well at the edge of the property, the well. He'd managed 3 weeks of ignoring it, of following Mr. Bachman's cryptic warning, of convincing himself it didn't matter. But tonight, in the hollow silence of his too-empty house, it suddenly mattered very much. What was he afraid of? An old man's superstition? A vague warning with no explanation? He was 45 years old, alone in a house that didn't feel like home, waiting for phone calls that got cancelled and text messages that never came. What exactly did he have to lose? Dennis grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and headed outside before he could talk himself out of it. The October air had a bite to it now, cold enough to see his breath. He crossed the yard, dead leaves crunching under his feet, until he stood directly in front of the well. Up close, It was more substantial than it appeared from the house. The stones fitted together with craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore, the wooden cover warped but solid. He set the flashlight on the ground, angled upward, and gripped the iron ring embedded in the cover. It was cold against his palms, slightly rusty but sturdy. He pulled, the cover didn't budge. Dennis adjusted his stance, bent his knees and pulled harder. Wood scraped against stone, a sound like a groan, and the cover shifted an inch, then two. He worked it back and forth, gradually loosening decades of settled weight, until finally it came free. The smell hit him first. Damp earth, mineral-rich water, stone that had been sealed away from sunlight for years. Not unpleasant, just old, ancient even. He picked up the flashlight and aimed it into the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness, revealing stone walls that descended far deeper than he'd expected. No water that he could see, just empty space going down, down, down. The well wasn't sealed at all, or if it had been, someone had unsealed it long ago. Dennis's heart was pounding now, though he couldn't have said why. It was just a hole in the ground, but something about the depth of it, the absolute darkness, made his palms sweat. He needed rope. The garage yielded an old climbing rope left by the previous owner, still in decent condition. Dennis tested it, found it strong enough, and returned to the well. He tied one end around the oak tree 10 feet away, a solid anchor point, and fashioned a large loop with a weight at the other end. A grappling hook of sorts, improvised from tools and intuition. Standing at the well's edge, he lowered the rope slowly, playing it out hand over hand. 5 feet, 10 feet, 15, 20, the rope went slack. Something was down there. Something solid. Dennis's breath came faster now. He pulled the rope gently, testing. Whatever was below had weight to it. He tugged harder and felt resistance, not the resistance of the rope catching on stone, but of something attached, something that didn't want to rise. He began pulling in earnest, wrapping the rope around his forearms for better leverage, using his legs and back. Slowly, incrementally, whatever was below began to ascend. It took 20 minutes of steady effort before he could see it, a dark shape emerging from the depths, spinning slightly as it rose. Another 5 minutes and he could make out details. A box of some kind, rectangular, covered in mineral deposits and grime. Finally, gasping from exertion, Dennis hauled it over the edge and onto the grass beside the well. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard, staring at what he'd found. It was a case, military style, the kind designed to be waterproof and airtight. Scratched and aged but remarkably intact. The latches were corroded but not rusted through. Someone had gone to considerable effort to protect whatever was inside. Dennis looked back at the house, at the lit windows that seemed very far away suddenly. He thought about Mr. Bachman's warning, about the Brenners who'd lived here and left, about the letter mentioning challenges and prayers for peace. His hands were shaking as he reached for the case. It was heavier than it looked, and the latches fought him, but eventually they gave way with metallic clicks that sounded too loud in the quiet night. Dennis held his breath and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was wrapped in plastic, careful, meticulous preservation. He could see the outlines of objects through the transparent material. Rectangles that might be photographs, bundles that could be letters, small items wrapped individually. He lifted out the top layer, handling it like the fragile thing it was, and carried everything inside. At his kitchen table, under the bright overhead light, Dennis carefully unwrapped the first bundle. Photographs slid out onto the table, dozens of them professionally printed, some in that distinctive coloring of 1980s film stock. He spread them carefully, studying each one. A family, mother, father, daughter, son, standing in front of this very house, the well visible in the background. The father had his arm around the mother's shoulders. The children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, grinned at the camera with unself-conscious joy. The photo was labeled on the back in careful handwriting, "First day in our new home, June 1982. More photos, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, backyard barbecues. A typical American family documenting typical American moments. The children growing slightly older in each image, the parents aging gracefully, everyone smiling. But Dennis noticed something as he arranged them chronologically. The smiles in later photos didn't quite reach the eyes. The father's arm around the mother's shoulders looked stiff rather than affectionate. By the photos dated 1986, they were standing farther apart, the children between them like a buffer. He unwrapped another bundle, letters, dozens of them, bound together with string that had aged to the color of old bone. He untied the first bundle carefully and selected the top letter. The paper was expensive stationery, slightly yellowed. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, careful. "My dearest Sheila," it began. "I'm writing this, even though you're just downstairs watching television. I suppose I'm writing to the you that will exist someday, when you're old enough to understand what I cannot say to you now." Dennis's throat tightened. This was intensely personal. A mother writing to her daughter, preserving thoughts meant for the future. He read on. "Your father and I are struggling. I don't know if you've noticed yet, though you're such a perceptive child that you probably have. We're trying to protect you and Kevin from our problems, but I fear we're only teaching you that love means silence. That family means pretending everything is fine when it isn't." The letter continued for 2 pages, describing the slow dissolution of a marriage, the desperate attempts to hold things together, the growing realization that sometimes love isn't enough. It was dated March 1985. Dennis set it down carefully and reached for another bundle. This one felt different. He unwrapped it to find cassette tapes, each one labeled with a date and brief description. June 1985, Kevin's birthday. December 1985, Christmas message. April 1986, to my future self. He stared at the tapes, his hands trembling now for entirely different reasons. Someone had buried not just memories, but voices. Actual recorded voices from decades ago, preserved in a waterproof case at the bottom of a well. Why, who does this? Who takes their most intimate family moments and hides them away like treasure or evidence? Dennis looked at the spread of artifacts on his table, the photographs showing a family's slow fracture, the letters revealing private pain, the tapes promising to let him hear the voices of people he'd never met. The Brenners, Richard and Patricia, Sheila and Kevin, they'd lived in this house, raised their children here, fell apart here. And then someone, Patricia he assumed from the handwriting, had taken these memories and buried them. Not destroyed them, buried them, preserved them. For what? For whom? Dennis realized his cheeks were wet. He was crying, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Maybe because these strangers' pain felt so familiar. Maybe because someone had cared enough to document their family's truth instead of pretending it never happened. Or maybe because he'd spent the last 6 months trying to forget his own family's dissolution. And here was proof that forgetting was impossible. The artifact sat before him like an accusation and an invitation both. Mr. Buckman's warning echoed in his mind. Don't go near that well. Too late for that now. Dennis gathered the photographs carefully, stacked the letters, lined up the tapes. Tomorrow he'd need to find a cassette player. Tonight he'd simply sit with this discovery and try to understand what it meant. Outside, the well stood open to the night sky, empty now of its secret burden. And Dennis Hartley, alone in his kitchen at midnight, felt less alone than he had in months. Dennis woke the next morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. The artifacts were still spread across his kitchen table where he'd left them, carefully arranged, waiting. He made coffee and sat down to examine them more thoroughly in the clear morning light. The photographs told their story in silent images. He organized them by date, creating a timeline of the Brenner family's 6 years in this house. Early photos radiated genuine happiness. Richard Brenner looked proud and capable, his hand steady on his son's shoulder. Patricia's smile was warm, reaching all the way to her eyes. The children, Sheila and Kevin, were unself-conscious in the way only children can be, their joy uncomplicated. But somewhere around 1984, the photographs changed. The smiles became more forced. Richard appeared in fewer pictures. When he was present, there was a distance in his eyes, as if he was looking at something beyond the camera, beyond his family, toward some private darkness only he could see. Dennis needed to hear the voices. He needed these people to become real, not just images frozen in time. He drove to 3 thrift stores before finding what he needed. An old cassette player, dusty but functional, for $12. The clerk looked at him strangely when he tested it right there at the counter, but Dennis didn't care. It worked. That was all that mattered. Back home, he selected the earliest tape, June 1985, Kevin's birthday. His hands trembled slightly as he loaded it into the player and pressed play. Static, then a click, then a voice, warm, masculine, touched with nervousness. "Okay, is this thing on? Kevin, buddy, if you're hearing this, it means I figured out how to work this recorder your mom got me. Happy 8th birthday, son." Dennis sat perfectly still, barely breathing. Richard Brenner's voice continued, growing more confident. "I wanted to record this for you to listen to when you're older, maybe when you're my age, 37, with kids of your own. I want you to remember this time, this birthday, this moment when you were 8, and the world was full of possibilities." The voice was so alive, so present. Dennis could hear the smile in it, the genuine love for his son. "We're going to Cedar Point next month, remember? You've been talking about it for weeks. The roller coasters. Your mom is terrified, but she's agreed to go because she loves you more than she fears heights. That's real love, Kevin. Remember that." Richard talked about family traditions, inside jokes Dennis couldn't fully understand. He made promises, camping trips, fishing lessons, teaching Kevin to drive someday. The tape was only 15 minutes long, but it contained the complete portrait of a father who believed in the future. Dennis stopped the tape and sat in silence. That voice, so full of hope and certainty, belonged to a man who didn't yet know he was heading toward collapse. The date was June 1985. Based on the letters and photographs, by June 1986, Richard would be a different person entirely. What happened in that year? Dennis returned to the letters, reading them chronologically now. Most were from Patricia to various people. Her mother, her sister, a close friend named Carol. The early ones were cheerful, discussing home improvements and the children's activities. Sheila was taking piano lessons. Kevin had joined a soccer team. Richard had been promoted at work. Normal life, unfolding normally. Then in a letter dated November 1984, a crack appeared. "Richard has been working such long hours lately," Patricia wrote to her sister. "I know the promotion means more responsibility, but I barely see him anymore. When he is home, he seems distant, distracted. I've tried talking to him about it, but he insists everything is fine. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm being oversensitive." 3 months later, another letter to the same sister. "I don't think it's just work. Something else is bothering him, but he won't tell me what. Last night I found him sitting in the garage at 2 in the morning, just sitting there in the dark. When I asked what was wrong, he said he couldn't sleep. But it's more than insomnia. I can feel it." Dennis recognized that feeling, the slow realization that the person you married is slipping away, becoming someone you don't quite know. He'd felt it himself in the final year of his own marriage, that helpless sensation of watching someone drift beyond reach. He found more tapes and listened to them in order. Richard's recordings became less frequent as the months progressed. The December 1985 Christmas message was stilted, forced, his voice carrying an undercurrent of something Dennis couldn't quite identify. Sadness? Shame? Self-loathing? "Merry Christmas, kids, Dad here. Just wanted to say," a long pause, "just wanted to say I love you both very much. More than you know. I hope someday you'll understand that sometimes people struggle with things that don't make sense. That doesn't mean the love isn't real." The tape ended abruptly, as if Richard had run out of words or courage. Dennis pressed his palms against his eyes, feeling the weight of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just a family story. It was a document of psychological collapse, preserved with heartbreaking care. He cross-referenced the photographs again. Richard's appearance changed noticeably in 1985 and 1986. His face became gaunt. His eyes, once bright and focused, took on a haunted quality. In one photo from a backyard barbecue, he stood apart from everyone else, holding a beer, staring at nothing. Patricia had captured it all. She documented the dissolution with the same care she'd once documented the happy moments. Why? What had compelled her to preserve this pain? Dennis found a partial answer in a letter dated August 1986, written by Patricia, but apparently never sent. It was addressed to Richard. "I found your resignation letter today. The one you wrote but didn't submit. I wasn't snooping. It fell out of your work manual when I was cleaning the den. Richard, what's happening to you? What are these unforgivable mistakes you wrote about? What personal failures?" Dennis's attention sharpened. A resignation letter. He searched through the remaining papers and found it. Richard's handwriting, shakier than in earlier documents, dated September 1986. "To whom it may concern, I regret to inform you that I can no longer fulfill my duties as regional manager. Personal failures and unforgivable mistakes have compromised my ability to perform at the level this position requires. I take full responsibility for my inadequacies. Please accept my resignation effective immediately." The letter was never sent, never signed. Just written and tucked away, a confession to himself of perceived sins Dennis couldn't begin to understand. What mistakes? What failures? The documents hinted at darkness, but never fully revealed it. Dennis stood and paced his kitchen, trying to process everything. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. The morning had disappeared into research, into the lives of people who'd lived here decades before him. His phone buzzed, a text from Trevor. "Hey, Dad, all good?" Dennis stared at the message. 2 words, minimal effort. His son checking a box, fulfilling a duty. He thought about Richard Brenner's birthday message to Kevin, so full of love and intention. He thought about his own children, busy with their lives, giving him the emotional scraps they could spare. For the first time in months, instead of accepting the distance, Dennis felt angry. No, not angry. Sad. He felt profoundly sad about the gap between the father he wanted to be and the one he'd become. The father who waited for cancelled phone calls and 2-word text messages. The father who disappeared into his own divorce aftermath and forgotten to stay present for his children. He texted back, "Can we talk sometime?" Really talk? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Sure, Dad, this weekend?" "I'd like that." Dennis set the phone down and returned to the artifacts. Somewhere in this collection was the rest of the story. The incident that broke Richard, the final dissolution, the reason Patricia had buried these memories instead of burning them. And maybe, just maybe, understanding the Brenners' tragedy would help him avoid his own. He picked up another letter and continued reading. Outside, Mr. Bachman stood at his fence line, watching Dennis's house. His expression was troubled, resigned. He'd known this would happen eventually. The well never kept its secrets forever. It had simply been waiting for someone lonely enough, curious enough, desperate enough to listen. That evening, Dennis found himself standing on Mr. Bachman's porch, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He needed answers. He needed context for the pain he'd been absorbing all day. Mr. Bachman answered on the 3rd knock, unsurprised to see Dennis standing there. His expression was weary, as if he'd been expecting this visit for weeks. "You opened it," Mr. Bachman said. "Not a question." "I did." The old man sighed deeply and stepped aside. "Come in, then. I'll make coffee." The interior of Mr. Bachman's house was neat and spare, the home of someone who'd lived alone for a long time. Photographs lined the mantel, showing a younger Mr. Bachman with a woman who must have been his wife, their life together captured in fading images. They sat at the kitchen table with their coffee, and Dennis waited. He'd learned that sometimes silence was the best question. "The Brenners moved in during summer of 1982, Mr. Bachman began finally, his hands wrapped around his mug. "Richard and Patricia, Sheila and Kevin, they seemed perfect, you know. The kind of family you see in commercials. Richard worked in management at Whitmore Manufacturing. Good job, stable income. Patricia worked part-time at the library. The kids were polite, well-behaved. They fit right into the neighborhood." Mr. Bachman paused, his eyes distant with memory. "We had block parties back then. Cookouts in the summer. Halloween parties for the kids. The Brenners came to everything. Richard would man the grill, tell jokes, help other folks fix things. He was handy that way. Patricia organized the neighborhood book club. They were good people. What changed? Dennis asked quietly. I'm not entirely sure, Mr. Bachman admitted. Nobody is, really. It started around 1984, maybe early 1985. Richard started coming home later from work. Not falling down drunk or anything dramatic like that, just later. And when he was home, he seemed elsewhere. You'd wave to him, he'd wave back, but there was nothing behind it. Like looking at a photograph of a person instead of the actual person. Dennis thought of Richard's voice on the tapes, growing hollower as the months progressed. Patricia tried to keep up appearances, Mr. Bachman continued. She still came to book club, still brought cookies to bake sales. But you could see the strain. She lost weight, started wearing long sleeves even in summer. I always wondered about that, though I never asked. Wasn't my business. The children? Sheila became quiet. She'd been such a chatty little thing, always asking questions, always curious. Then she just stopped, started spending all her time in her room. Kevin developed this nervous habit of picking at his fingernails until they bled. His mother would put bandages on them, but he'd pick those off too. The image was heartbreaking. Two children absorbing their parents' pain, manifesting it in their own small ways. By late 1986, Richard had moved out, Mr. Bachman said. Just disappeared one weekend. I saw the moving truck, saw him loading boxes, but he wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Patricia stood at the door watching, and I'll never forget her face. Not angry, just resigned, like she'd been expecting it. Did anyone know why? Dennis asked. What caused it? Mr. Bachman shook his head. People talked, of course. They always do. Some said he'd had an affair. Others said he'd lost money gambling or drinking. But I never saw evidence of any of that. My wife, she passed in 2008. She thought it was depression. Mental health wasn't something people talked about back then, not the way they do now. But she recognized it. Her brother had struggled with it. Dennis thought of the resignation letter, the self-loathing in Richard's words. Patricia and the kids stayed in the house through most of 1987, Mr. Bachman continued. She kept working at the library, kept the yard maintained, kept going through the motions. But the house felt wrong somehow, like it was holding its breath. Then one evening in March, I remember it clearly because it was raining, I was putting out the trash and I saw Patricia in her yard, standing by that well. She was holding a box, just standing there in the rain, looking down into it. Did you talk to her? I started to walk over, but something stopped me. The way she was standing there, it felt sacred somehow, private. I went back inside and watched from the window. She stood there for maybe 20 minutes just holding that box. Then she opened the well cover, took her forever because it was so heavy, and lowered something down with a rope. When she was done, she closed the cover and went back inside. Never looked around to see if anyone was watching. Dennis's chest tightened. Patricia alone in the rain, burying her family's memories. And they moved away a few weeks later, Mr. Bachman said. Patricia told me they were going to stay with her sister in another state, start fresh. I asked if she'd heard from Richard. She said yes, that he was getting help, that maybe someday they'd... He stopped, shook his head. But there was no conviction in her voice. She was just saying what you say when your marriage ends and you have to explain it to neighbors. Did you ever hear from them again? Christmas cards for a few years from Patricia. Generic ones with printed messages, just her signature. Then those stopped too. The house stood empty for 6 months before it sold. After that, it went through owners pretty regularly. Nobody stayed long, not because of anything wrong with the house, just, I don't know. It had a feeling to it. Mr. Bachman looked directly at Dennis now. I knew what she put down there. I didn't know the details, but I knew it was their life, their memories, things too painful to keep but too important to destroy. That's why I warned you. Some things are meant to stay buried, but she preserved them, Dennis said. She didn't destroy them. She could have burned everything, thrown it away. Instead, she protected it, waterproofed it. That means something. Mr. Bachman considered this. Maybe, or maybe she just couldn't let go. Couldn't keep it, but couldn't destroy it either. So she did both, kept it and buried it. They sat in silence for a moment, both men thinking about Patricia's choice, about the weight of memories, about what we owe to the past. What did you find? Mr. Bachman asked finally. Dennis told him about the photographs, the letters, the tapes. He described Richard's voice, full of hope and then hollow with despair. Patricia's documentation of their slow dissolution. The children's silent suffering. There's something they reference but never explain, Dennis said. An incident, mistakes, failures, but no details about what actually happened. Mr. Bachman was quiet for a long time. Maybe that's because the incident wasn't one thing. Maybe it was just life. Just the accumulation of disappointments and failures, real or imagined, until the weight became unbearable. Not dramatic, just quietly, steadily unbearable. Dennis thought about his own divorce, his own slow drift away from his family. No single catastrophic event, just the gradual erosion of connection, until one day they all looked up and realized they'd become strangers. I called my daughter today, Dennis said. Really called her. Asked if we could talk. Actually talk. Mr. Bachman smiled. Good, that's good. The Brenner's story, it's making me see my own life differently. Then maybe Patricia knew what she was doing after all, Mr. Bachman said. Maybe she wasn't just burying the past. Maybe she was leaving a message for whoever needed it. Dennis walked home through the autumn darkness, his mind full of voices from decades ago. When he got inside, he found a text from Laurel. Saturday afternoon work for you? Can do a video call, take our time. He smiled and responded, Perfect. I love you. 3 dots appeared. Love you too, Dad. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Dennis returned to the kitchen table and the scattered artifacts of the Brenner family's life. Tomorrow, he'd continue reading, listening, piecing together their story. Tonight, he'd made the first small step toward repairing his own. Outside, the well stood silent under the stars, its burden lifted, its purpose perhaps finally fulfilled. Dennis spent the next 3 days immersed in 1986, the year the Brenner family fractured beyond repair. He moved through the artifacts methodically now, no longer randomly sampling, but following the chronological thread of their dissolution. The cassette tapes from this period were harder to listen to. Richard's voice had changed fundamentally. Where it had once been warm and steady, it now carried a tremor, a fragility that made Dennis's chest ache. One tape, dated March 1986, was particularly difficult. Richard wasn't speaking to his children this time. He was speaking to himself. I don't know why I'm recording this. Maybe because I need to hear my own voice say it out loud. Maybe because someday when this is over, if it's ever over, I'll need to remember how bad it got. A long pause. The sound of ice clinking in a glass. I'm failing at everything. My job, my marriage, being a father. I look at Kevin and Sheila and I see them watching me, waiting for me to be the dad I used to be, and I don't know how. I've forgotten how. It's like there's this fog in my head, and I can see them through it, but I can't reach them. Can't reach Patricia. Can't reach anyone. Another pause. The sound of drinking. Today, Kevin asked me to help him with his science project. Simple request. Any decent father would have said yes. Instead, I told him I was too tired. I saw his face fall, watched him try to hide his disappointment. He's 8 years old and already learning to expect nothing from me. Richard's voice cracked. I tried to apologize later, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood in his doorway watching him work on the project alone, and I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Just stood there like a useless piece of furniture. The tape continued for another 10 minutes, Richard cataloguing his failures, his inadequacies, his inability to be the person his family needed. Dennis had to stop it twice, overwhelmed by the raw pain in the man's voice. This wasn't laziness or selfishness. This was illness. This was depression swallowing a man whole while his family watched helplessly. Dennis found more letters from Patricia, these ones to a friend named Carol, who seemed to serve as her confidant and lifeline. I don't recognize him anymore, Patricia wrote in April 1986. He comes home from work and goes straight to the garage. Sits out there for hours. I bring him dinner and he thanks me politely, like I'm a waitress, like we're strangers. We've been married for 14 years, Carol. 14 years. And suddenly I don't know how to talk to my own husband. The letter continued, describing Patricia's attempts to help, suggesting therapy, offering to go with him, researching depression in the library where she worked. But Richard refused everything. insisted he was fine, that he just needed time. That work was stressful, and he'd get through it. But he's not getting through it, Patricia wrote. He's drowning. And I'm standing on the shore watching, throwing him ropes he won't grab. Dennis found receipts tucked between letters, documentation of Richard's 3 therapy sessions in May 1986. He'd gone, tried to get help, but then stopped. A note in Patricia's handwriting said simply, he said the therapist didn't understand. Refused to go back. Photographs from this period were sparse. When Richard appeared in them, he looked like a ghost, physically present but spiritually absent. One photo from a 4th of July gathering showed the whole family at a neighborhood barbecue. Patricia and the children wore forced smiles. Richard stood slightly apart, holding a plate of food he wasn't eating, staring at something beyond the camera's frame. Someone had written on the back, "Last family photo, July 4th, 1986. Dennis set it aside carefully, his throat tight. Among the artifacts, he found something that broke his heart, a birthday card from Kevin to Richard, dated September 1986. The front showed a cartoon father and son fishing together. Inside, in a child's careful handwriting, "Dear Dad, happy birthday. I miss when you were happy. I know you're sad about something, but I don't know what. Mom says you're going through a hard time. I hope it gets better soon. I love you even when you're sad. Love, Kevin." The card had never been given. It sat in the case, preserved but undelivered, Kevin's love expressed and then tucked away. Dennis had to step outside, stand on his porch, and breathe the cold October air until he could compose himself. This wasn't just sadness he was feeling, it was recognition. He saw himself in Richard's withdrawal, in his inability to reach his children even when he loved them desperately. His phone rang. Trevor's name on the screen. "Hey, Dad, you said you wanted to talk." Dennis wasn't prepared. He'd expected a text to schedule a call, not the call itself. But Trevor was here now, on the line, and Dennis couldn't waste it. "Yeah," Dennis managed. "Yeah, I did. How are you doing?" "Really doing?" A pause. "I'm okay. Work's good. Roommate situation is fine. Nothing major happening. And how are you doing with everything? The divorce, the changes, all of it?" Another pause, longer this time. "Dad, is something wrong?" "No, I realized I never really asked. I told you and your sister about the divorce. I moved into this place, and I just assumed you both were fine. But I never actually asked." Trevor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "We were worried about you, honestly. After the split, you kind of disappeared. Not literally, but you know what I mean. You stopped calling as much. When we did talk, it was all surface stuff. Weather and work and nothing real." Dennis closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. I thought I was giving you space. Thought you were busy with your lives and didn't need your divorced dad being needy. Dad, we're never too busy for you. You have to show up. Actually show up, not just exist on the periphery." The words landed like a gentle blow. "Show up. Actually be present." The same thing Richard Brenner had failed to do, watching it destroy his family one silent day at a time. "You're right," Dennis said. "I haven't been showing up. Not really. And I want to change that." They talked for an hour. Really talked. About Trevor's job, his worries about the future, his girlfriend that Dennis had only heard about in passing. About the divorce and how it had felt watching his parents split up, even as an adult. About how he'd wanted to help Dennis but hadn't known how. "You seemed like you wanted to be alone," Trevor said. "Like you were processing something and we'd just be in the way." "I did want to be alone," Dennis admitted. "But that doesn't mean it was good for me. And it definitely wasn't good for us, for our relationship." "So what changed?" Trevor asked. "Why now?" Dennis looked at his kitchen table, still covered with the Brenner's artifacts. "I found something. A family story. And it's showing me what happens when you let the distance grow too far. I don't want that to be us." "It won't be," Trevor said firmly. "Not if we're both trying." After they hung up, Dennis sat with the phone in his hand, feeling something shift inside him. The Brenner's tragedy was teaching him, guiding him, showing him exactly what not to do. He returned to the artifacts with renewed purpose. Somewhere in this collection was the rest of Richard's story, not just the descent, but what came after. Because Richard had come back in 2003, had added his tape to the collection, which meant there was redemption in this story, not just tragedy. Dennis needed to find it. He picked up the next letter and continued reading, searching for the path from darkness to whatever light Richard had eventually found. The documents from late 1986 and early 1987 painted a picture of careful dissolution, the legal skeleton of a family's ending. Dennis found the separation agreement dated November 1986, its language formal and emotionally sterile. Patricia would retain primary custody of the children. Richard would have visitation rights every other weekend. Assets would be divided fairly. Everything was reasonable, equitable, civilized. But tucked between the legal documents were artifacts that revealed the human cost of those tidy arrangements. School assignments from Sheila, her handwriting growing smaller and more cramped as the months progressed. A book report on Bridge to Terabithia that made Dennis's eyes burn. She'd written, "This book is about loss and how children deal with it when adults can't help them. Sometimes you have to create your own safe place in your imagination because the real world is too hard." She'd received an A. The teacher had written, "Excellent analysis, Sheila. Very mature." At 10 years old, Sheila was already learning that maturity meant bearing pain silently. Kevin's artifacts were different, more physical evidence of distress. Drawings of houses with dark windows. A journal entry assigned by his teacher, "My family is changing. Dad doesn't live here anymore. Mom says it's not my fault, but it feels like my fault. I don't know what I did wrong." The teacher had responded with a kind note about how divorce was always the parent's decision, never the child's responsibility. But Kevin's words suggested he hadn't internalized that truth. Then Dennis found something that stopped him completely. Torn pages from what must have been a larger diary, written by Sheila in early 1987. The handwriting was teenage careful, each letter formed with deliberate precision. The entry was dated January 15th, 1987. "I saw Dad today. First time in 2 months. He picked us up for lunch but barely talked. Kevin tried to tell him about his soccer game, but Dad just nodded and said, 'That's great, buddy,' without really listening. I could see Kevin's face fall. After lunch, Dad hugged us goodbye and I felt him shaking, like he was crying but trying to hide it. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I understood he was sad, that I wasn't angry. But the words wouldn't come. We just hugged, and then he left and Kevin cried in the car on the way home. Dennis had to set the pages down and walk away. He paced his living room, trying to contain the emotion rising in his chest. These were children, innocent, loving children, trying to navigate their parents' pain while carrying their own. He thought about Laurel and Trevor during his divorce. They'd been adults, yes, but that didn't mean they hadn't suffered. He'd been so focused on his own pain, his own sense of failure, that he'd never asked them how they were processing it. Never given them space to grieve the family structure they'd known their whole lives. Just like Richard, he'd disappeared into his own darkness and left his children to figure it out alone. Dennis returned to the diary pages, forcing himself to continue. "I wrote Dad a letter today, but I don't know if I'll send it. I told him that I love him no matter what, that I know he's struggling with something big, that I forgive him for not being able to be the dad he used to be. Is that wrong? To forgive someone who hasn't apologized? Mom says Dad is dealing with his own problems and we need to be patient. But I'm tired of being patient. I just want him to come back. Not to live here, I know that won't happen, but to really come back. To look at me and actually see me." The letter she'd written was also in the case, carefully folded, addressed to Dad on the outside, never sent. Dennis unfolded it with shaking hands. The letter was devastating in its generosity. Sheila, at just 10 years old, had written with a maturity that should have been decades beyond her. "Dear Dad, I know you're hurting, and I wish I could help. I don't understand everything that's happening, but I want you to know some things. First, I love you. That doesn't change just because you don't live here anymore. Second, I'm not angry at you. Mom says you're sick in a way that's hard to explain, like being sick in your heart instead of your body. I think I understand that. Third, I hope you can forgive yourself for whatever you think you did wrong. You're still my dad, and you'll always be my dad, even if we're not all together. Please don't forget that. Love, Sheila. The paper was stained. Old tears. Impossible to know if they were Sheila's or Patricia's or even Richard's if he'd found it later. Dennis sat with the letter for a long time, thinking about forgiveness, about the grace children offer their parents even when those parents can't offer it to themselves. He found more tapes and played them chronologically. One from Patricia, recorded alone, her voice steady but weighted with exhaustion. I don't know who will hear this, if anyone. Maybe just me, years from now, needing to remember. Or maybe someone else will find these things and wonder about us, who we were, what happened to us. If you're hearing this, stranger, know that we tried. We loved each other. We built a life together. But sometimes love isn't enough when someone is drowning in their own mind. She paused, and Dennis could hear her breathing, gathering strength to continue. I'm putting these items in the well because I can't keep them in the new house. Too painful. But I can't destroy them either. They're proof we existed, that we mattered, that our family was real even if it couldn't last. Richard and I, we weren't meant to be forever, but we were meant to be for a while. The children were meant to exist. The love was real. The pain was real. All of it mattered. Another pause. To whoever finds this, we were the Brenners. Richard, Patricia, Sheila, and Kevin. We lived in this house from 1982 to 1987. We were happy, and then we were sad, and then we were separate. But we were never nothing. Remember that about us. Remember that we tried. The tape ended. Dennis sat in his kitchen as afternoon faded to evening, surrounded by the documentary evidence of a family's life and death. He thought about Patricia's words, "We were never nothing," and understood why she'd preserved these memories so carefully. This wasn't just about keeping the past alive. It was about insisting that their struggle mattered, that their pain had meaning, that they deserved to be remembered as whole people, not just as a failed marriage statistic. His phone buzzed. A text from Laurel. "Looking forward to Saturday, Dad. Really looking forward to it." Dennis smiled and responded, "Me too. I love you very much. I'm sorry I've been distant." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I love you too. And Dad, we're going to be okay. All of us." Dennis felt tears on his cheeks. The Brenners had taught him what not to do. Now his own children were showing him it wasn't too late to do better. He carefully organized the artifacts he'd been through, creating a clear timeline of the family's dissolution. But he noticed something. The collection ended in early 1987 when the family moved away. Everything after that was missing until Richard's 2003 tape. What happened in those 16 years? How did Richard go from the broken man in these recordings to someone healthy enough to come back and add to the time capsule? That was the story Dennis needed to hear. The redemption arc, the proof that healing was possible. He found the 2003 tape again, the one labeled "To the Finder." He'd listened to it once, the night of his discovery, but now he needed to hear it again with full context. Dennis loaded the tape and pressed play, ready to learn how broken things could be repaired. Dennis had nearly finished cataloguing all the artifacts when he noticed something odd about the case itself. The interior seemed slightly shallower than the exterior dimensions suggested. He ran his fingers along the bottom, pressing gently, and felt a slight give. A false bottom. His heart rate accelerated as he worked his fingers around the edges, finding a small notch that allowed him to lift the base panel. Beneath it lay items he hadn't seen before, newer additions, protected in their own sealed compartment. A cassette tape, its label fresh compared to the aged ones from the 1980s. The date read August 2003, 16 years after the Brenners had left this house. The label said simply, "To the Finder." Next to it was a letter in a sealed plastic sleeve, addressed to the person in the house, and a photograph, recent, in color, showing a man in his 50s standing in front of this very house, in front of the well. He looked weathered but peaceful, his smile genuine, his eyes clear. Richard Brenner. It had to be. Dennis's hands trembled as he loaded the tape. He needed to hear this, needed to understand how the broken man from 1986 had become the peaceful one from 2003. Static, then a click, then a voice. Older than the recordings from the 80s, steadier, carrying a weight of hard-won wisdom. If you're hearing this, you found what Patricia buried. I've come back to add this final piece. Dennis sat perfectly still, barely breathing. My name is Richard Brenner. I lived in your house from 1982 to 1986 with my wife Patricia and our children, Sheila and Kevin. If you've listened to the other tapes, read the letters, seen the photographs, you know our family fell apart. You know I fell apart. What you don't know is what came after. So I'm here to tell you. Richard paused, and Dennis could hear him gathering his thoughts. After Patricia and I separated, I spiraled. That's the only word for it. Lost my job in early 1987, started drinking heavily, moved from one cheap apartment to another, burning through what savings I had. By 1989, I was living in my car, sleeping in parking lots, convinced I'd destroyed everything good in my life and didn't deserve to recover. Dennis closed his eyes, imagining that descent, the man from the birthday recording, so full of hope, reduced to homelessness and despair. In October 1989, I tried to kill myself. Took a bottle of pills in a motel room, wrote a note saying I was sorry, that everyone would be better off without me. Obviously, it didn't work. The motel manager found me, called an ambulance. I woke up in a psychiatric hospital 3 days later. Richard's voice remained steady, recounting these facts without drama, as if he'd told this story many times before. I spent 6 weeks in that facility. It was the first time anyone really explained depression to me, that it wasn't weakness or failure, but an illness. Chemical imbalances in the brain, treatable, manageable. Not my fault. That last part was hardest to accept. I'd spent years believing I'd failed my family through some moral deficiency, some fundamental flaw in my character. Learning it was an illness didn't erase the guilt, but it changed it. Dennis thought about the resignation letter, the self-loathing, the inability to accept help. I got sober in 1990, started therapy, actual ongoing therapy, not just 3 sessions and quitting. Got on medication that actually worked. Found a support group, took a job washing dishes. Humbling for a former regional manager, but honest work that got me through the days. Slowly, very slowly, I started to rebuild. Richard paused again, and Dennis heard emotion creeping into his voice. In 95, I reached out to Patricia, not to reconcile romantically, that ship had sailed, but to apologize, to make amends. She could have told me to go to hell, would have been justified. Instead, she agreed to meet me for coffee. We talked for 3 hours that day. I apologized for everything, for withdrawing, for not getting help sooner, for the pain I'd caused her and the children. She told me about the well, about what she'd buried there. She said she'd done it because she couldn't keep the memories, but couldn't destroy them either. That our family's story deserved to exist somewhere, even if just at the bottom of a well. Dennis thought about Patricia's tape, her insistence that they were never nothing. Patricia and I stayed in touch after that. Not frequently, but regularly. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls. She remarried in 1996, a good man, I'm told. I was happy for her. She deserved happiness. In 2001, I remarried too, a woman named Charlotte who'd lost her first husband to cancer. She had a teenage daughter who needed a father figure. I got a chance to do it right this time, to show up, to be present, to get help when I needed it instead of drowning alone. Richard's voice brightened noticeably when speaking about his second marriage. Patricia gave me permission to add to the time capsule if I ever wanted to. She said maybe someday someone would find it. Someone who needed to know that families survive, even when they change shape. So in August 2003, I came back to this house. Strangers were living there. I didn't knock or explain. Just waited until late one night, opened the well, and added this tape and the letter you're holding. Dennis looked at the sealed letter, not yet opened. I'm recording this for you, whoever you are. You're probably wondering why someone would keep these memories. Why not just move on, forget, start fresh? Here's what I learned. You can't outrun your past, but you can make peace with it. You can acknowledge the pain, learn from it, let it teach you instead of destroy you. Richard's voice grew more intense, more personal. Patricia and I, we weren't meant to last forever, but we mattered. Our children mattered. The pain mattered because the love was real. If you found this, maybe you're looking for something too. Maybe you're trying to understand your own story by reading ours. Maybe you're in pain right now, thinking it will never get better. A long pause. Here's what I want you to know. Failure isn't the end. It's painful, it's real, but it's not the end. I destroyed my first marriage. Abandoned my children emotionally when they needed me most. Hit bottom so hard I didn't think I'd survive. But I did survive. I got help. I rebuilt. I found love again. I reconnected with my children. It took years, but we found our way back to each other. Dennis felt tears streaming down his face. Sheila is doing well. She's a school counselor now, married, has 2 kids of her own. She helps families communicate before they reach the breaking point we did. She turned our pain into purpose. Kevin struggled more. Addiction runs in families sometimes, and he inherited my demons. But when I made this recording, he was in recovery, working on himself. I'm proud of both of them. Richard's voice softened. Check the false bottom of the case. I left something for you, whoever you are. A letter and a photo. Proof that broken things can heal, that families survive in new forms, that second chances exist if you're willing to do the hard work. The tape continued for a few more minutes, Richard thanking whoever found this for bearing witness to his family's story, offering hope to anyone struggling with similar pain. Then it ended with a soft click. Dennis sat in complete silence, his mind reeling. This changed everything. What he'd thought was purely a tragedy was actually a story of redemption. Richard hadn't just survived, he'd healed, rebuilt, found peace. With shaking hands, Dennis opened the sealed letter. The handwriting was Richard's, dated August 2003. To the person in the house, it began. You've witnessed my family's darkest moments. Now let me tell you about the light. Whatever brought you to this house, whatever you're running from or toward, you're not alone. We're all just trying to find our way home. Sometimes we lose ourselves completely before we can find ourselves again. That's okay. That's human. The important thing is not giving up, not accepting that broken is permanent. I came back from complete destruction. So can you? The well held my family's pain for 16 years. Let it hold this message of hope too. You found these memories for a reason. Let them teach you what they taught me. Love survives. Families adapt, and healing is always possible if you're willing to reach for it. Dennis pressed the letter to his chest and wept, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. Richard had shown him the path forward. The Brenners' story wasn't a warning of what to avoid. It was proof that even catastrophic failure could transform into redemption. He looked at the photograph again. Richard, at 53, standing peacefully in front of the house where his life had once fallen apart. No shame in his expression, no regret. Just acceptance and hard-won peace. Dennis knew what he had to do now. The artifacts had served their purpose for him, but they belonged to someone else. They belonged to Sheila. He needed to find her. Saturday morning arrived with frost on the windows and clarity in Dennis's mind. Laurel would be calling in a few hours for their video chat, and he felt ready in a way he hadn't in months. The Brenners' story had given him something precious, perspective, hope, and the courage to reconnect. But first he had another task. He needed to find Sheila Brenner. Dennis spent Friday evening and Saturday morning researching. Social media profiles, professional directories, public records. The internet made people easier to find than they'd been in Patricia's time, when families could simply disappear into new states and new lives. He found her on the 3rd search attempt. Sheila Brenner Tillman, age 53, licensed family counselor in a town about 4 hours away. Her professional website included a photo, an older version of the child from the photographs, her father's eyes, her mother's gentle smile. Her bio mentioned her specialization in helping families navigate separation and divorce, particularly in supporting children through parental conflict. She'd turned her childhood pain into a career of preventing others from experiencing the same isolation she had. Dennis drafted an email, revised it 6 times. Finally settled on something simple and honest. Dear Ms. Brenner-Tillman, my name is Dennis Hartley, and I recently moved into the house on Willow Creek Lane, where your family lived from 1982 to 1987. I discovered something in the old well in the front yard, a case containing photographs, letters and recordings that I believe belonged to your family. Your mother preserved these items with great care, and your father added to them in 2003. I've spent the past weeks learning about your family's story, and it has profoundly affected my own life and healing. These memories belong to you. If you would like to reclaim any or all of these items, I would be honored to return them. If you prefer they remain where they are, I will continue to care for them with the respect they deserve. Please let me know how you would like to proceed. With deepest respect, Dennis Hartley. He included his phone number and address, then hovered over the send button for a full minute before clicking it. The email disappeared into the digital void. Now he could only wait. At 2 o'clock, Laurel's face appeared on his laptop screen. She was calling from her apartment, natural light coming through the window behind her. She looked good, healthy, settled, more at peace than he'd seen her since before the divorce. "Hi, Dad," she said, and her smile was genuine. "Hi, sweetheart. You look wonderful." They talked for over an hour. Real conversation, not the surface-level exchanges they'd fallen into. Laurel told him about her work at the nonprofit, the challenges of securing funding, the satisfaction of seeing their programs help communities. She mentioned she was seeing someone, nothing serious yet but promising. Dennis told her about the house, the neighborhood, his growing friendship with Mr. Backman, and then, carefully, he told her about the well. Laurel listened without interrupting as he explained the discovery, the artifacts, the Brenner family's story. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Dad, wow, that's intense. How are you processing all of this?" "It's been affecting me in ways I didn't expect," Dennis admitted. "Seeing how Richard withdrew from his family, how it damaged his children even though they loved him, it made me realize I've been doing the same thing. Not as severely, but the same pattern. Disappearing into my own pain and assuming you and your brother were fine." Laurel's expression softened. "We weren't always fine, Dad. The divorce was hard. Not because of you and Mom splitting up. Honestly, that made sense. You weren't happy together anymore, but afterward you just vanished emotionally. Like you were so focused on not being a burden that you forgot we still needed you." The words stung, but Dennis welcomed them. This was honest. This was real. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I made you feel that way." "I know. And I forgive you. We both do, Trevor and me. We just want you back. The real you, not the ghost version who makes polite conversation and pretends everything is fine." "I'm working on it," Dennis said. "That's why I wanted to really talk. Why I want to see you both more often. Not just holidays and obligatory calls, but actual relationship." "I'd like that," Laurel said, her eyes glistening. "I've missed you, Dad. The you from before everything got complicated." They talked until the laptop battery warning appeared. Before they hung up, Laurel said, "I'm glad you found that family's story. It sounds like they found you at exactly the right time." After the call ended, Dennis sat with the warm feeling of genuine connection. This was what healing felt like. Not dramatic revelation, but small, steady steps toward each other. His phone rang an hour later. Unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Hartley? This is Sheila Brenner-Tillman. I received your email." Dennis's heart jumped. "Sheila, thank you for calling." "I thank you." Her voice was warm, controlled, professional with an undercurrent of emotion. "I've been thinking about those items for over 30 years. My mother told me what she'd done before she passed away in 2015. She wanted me to know they were there, but said she couldn't bring herself to retrieve them. Some doors once closed are too heavy to reopen." "I understand. And my father, he told me about adding his tape before he died in 2018. He said someone would find them eventually, someone who needed to hear our story." Dennis's throat tightened. "I'm sorry for your losses. Both of your parents. Thank you. They both found peace eventually in different ways. That's what matters." She paused. "Mr. Hartley, I'd like to come see the house. To see the well again, and to reclaim some of the items, if that's still acceptable. Of course. Whenever works for you. Would this weekend be too soon? I know it's short notice, but once I heard from you, I need to do this now, while I have the courage. This weekend is perfect, Dennis said. Please come stay as long as you like. I have a guest room. They arranged the details. She'd arrive Saturday afternoon, stay through Sunday. Dennis gave her his address and phone number, told her to call if she needed anything. After hanging up, Dennis stood in his kitchen, looking at the artifacts still spread across the table. In less than a week, he'd meet the girl from the photographs, now a woman in her 50s, coming back to face her family's documented dissolution. He spent the next days preparing obsessively, cleaned the house thoroughly, prepared the guest room with fresh linens, bought groceries for meals he hoped she'd stay to share. He organized the artifacts with archival care, creating a clear inventory so Sheila could choose what she wanted to keep. Mrs. Keller noticed his activity when he was sweeping the front porch Friday afternoon. "You're certainly sprucing up the place," she called from her garden. Dennis walked over to the fence line. On impulse, he told her about Sheila's impending visit. Mrs. Keller listened with growing emotion. "That poor family," she said when he finished. "I moved here in 1989 after they'd gone. I always thought the house felt sad somehow, but I never knew why. Now I understand. Would you—" Dennis hesitated. "Would you want to meet her? When she comes? I think she might appreciate knowing the neighborhood remembers her family kindly." Mrs. Keller smiled. "I'd be honored. I'll bake something. People always feel better with fresh cookies." Friday evening, Dennis walked over to Mr. Bachman's house. The old man answered with his usual wariness, which transformed to understanding when Dennis explained. "She's coming back," Mr. Bachman said softly. "After all these years. Did you know her well?" "When she was young?" "Not well. She was a quiet child, especially toward the end. But I remember her helping her mother with yard work, always so serious, so careful, like she was trying to hold everything together through sheer will." He shook his head. "Too much burden for a child. Would you want to see her? Talk to her?" Mr. Bachman was quiet for a long moment. Yes, I would. I'd like to tell her that her family was loved here, that we didn't forget them." Saturday morning, Dennis woke early. Nervous energy propelled him through breakfast, through one final cleaning sweep, through organizing the artifacts one more time. He kept checking his phone for messages, for updates, for any sign that Sheila had changed her mind. At 2 o'clock, a car pulled into his driveway. Dennis watched from the window as a woman emerged. Professional clothing, careful movements, shoulders squared like she was preparing for battle. She stood for a moment looking at the house, and even from this distance Dennis could see her composing herself. Then her eyes found the well. She stopped moving entirely, just stood there, staring at the stone structure partially hidden by ivy, her hand pressed against her chest. Dennis gave her a moment, then stepped outside. "Sheila?" She turned, and he saw tears already streaming down her face. "It looks exactly the same," she whispered. "Smaller somehow, but the same." Dennis approached slowly, giving her space. "Welcome home," he said gently. She laughed, half sob, half genuine amusement. "I haven't called this place home in almost 40 years, but standing here now, yes, it feels like coming home." They stood together in the autumn afternoon, two strangers connected by the weight of memory and the promise of understanding. "Would you like to come inside?" Dennis asked. "Or would you prefer to— Can I see the well first?" Sheila interrupted. "Before anything else, I need to see it." Dennis nodded and stepped back, letting her approach alone. Sheila walked slowly toward the well, her steps measured, deliberate. When she reached it, she placed both hands on the stone, leaning forward slightly, as if listening for voices only she could hear. Dennis watched from the porch, giving her privacy for this reunion with her family's buried past. After several minutes, Sheila straightened and turned back to him. "I'm ready now," she said. "Show me what you found." Dennis brought the artifacts out slowly, watching Sheila's reactions to each item. They sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd first opened the case, and he gave her space to process decades of preserved memory. She handled the photographs first, spreading them across the table with trembling fingers. Her eyes moved from image to image, lingering on each face, each moment captured and frozen. "I remember this day," she said, touching a photo of a backyard birthday party.
Kevin's 6th birthday.
"Dad made a fort out of cardboard boxes. We played in it for hours." Her finger traced her father's face in the image. "He looked so happy here. I'd forgotten he was ever this happy." She moved through the collection chronologically, just as Dennis had. He watched her face shift from nostalgia to growing sadness as the later photos revealed the family's fracture. "You can see it happening," she said quietly. "In our faces. In how we're standing. By 1986, we're barely touching each other in photos. Like we'd become magnetic opposites, pushing away without meaning to." Dennis stayed silent, letting her lead. When she reached the letters, Sheila paused. "These are personal. Very personal." "I read them," Dennis admitted. "I'm sorry if that was an intrusion. I didn't understand what I was finding at first." "No," Sheila said quickly. "No, I'm glad you did. My mother preserved these for a reason. She wanted them to be found, to be read. Otherwise, she would have destroyed them." She picked up one of Patricia's letters, read it silently, tears streaming down her face. Then another, and another. When she reached the letter her mother had written to her, "My dearest Sheila," she made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She was trying so hard," Sheila said. "I didn't realize how hard she was trying to protect us. I thought as a child, I thought maybe she didn't care enough to fix it. But she cared so much. She just couldn't fix what was breaking." Dennis reached across the table, offering a box of tissues. Sheila took several, pressing them against her eyes. "The tapes," she said after a moment. "Do you have a player?" Dennis brought out the cassette player he'd bought. Sheila looked at it, then at him. "Will you stay while I listen? I don't think I can do this alone." "Of course." She selected the earliest tape, the birthday message to Kevin. When her father's voice filled the room, warm and hopeful and so alive, Sheila closed her eyes. "I haven't heard his voice in 7 years," she whispered. "Since he died. I'd forgotten how it sounded when he was healthy, when he was himself." They listened to the entire tape together. When it ended, Sheila sat in silence for a long moment. "He was a good father once," she said, "before the depression took him. I need to remember that. He wasn't the absence, the withdrawal, the pain. That was the illness. He was the man on this tape, loving, present, full of plans for the future." She listened to more tapes, each one harder than the last. The recordings from 1986, where Richard's voice carried the weight of his collapse, made her weep openly. Dennis sat with her, saying nothing, just present. When she reached her father's final tape, the one from 2003, she looked at Dennis. "You heard this already?" "Yes, it changed everything for me. Will you listen again? With me?" Dennis nodded. Richard's voice from 2003 filled the kitchen, telling the story of his descent and redemption. Sheila listened with absolute focus, occasionally pressing her hand over her mouth to contain her emotions. When Richard mentioned that Sheila had become a counselor, had turned their family's pain into purpose, she smiled through her tears. He was so proud of that. He told me so many times. But hearing him say it in this recording, it feels different. Like he's speaking to me across time. The tape continued, Richard's message about healing, about second chances, about how broken things can be repaired. When it ended, Sheila sat in profound silence. Finally she spoke. "I wrote him a letter once. When I was 16, right before we moved away, I told him I forgave him, that I loved him, that I hoped he'd find peace." She looked at Dennis. "Did you find that letter?" "Yes, it's here." Dennis retrieved it from the organized stack. Sheila held the unopened envelope, staring at her teenage handwriting on the front. "I never sent it. I was too afraid of what I don't know. Rejection, making things worse, so I just kept it." "Your mother saved it," Dennis said gently. "She knew it mattered, even if you never sent it." Sheila carefully opened the envelope and read the letter she'd written nearly 40 years ago. When she finished, she looked up at Dennis with an expression of wonder. "I'd forgotten I wrote this, forgotten I was capable of this kind of forgiveness at 16. She touched the paper gently. "That girl, she was wiser than I remembered, braver than I gave her credit for. She became a remarkable woman," Dennis said. "One who helps other families avoid the same pain." Sheila smiled, fragile but genuine. My father said something in his tape about how you probably found this because you needed it. Was he right? Dennis thought about his own divorce, his withdrawal from his children, the loneliness that had brought him to this house and eventually to the well. Yes, he said simply. He was right. Sheila reached across the table and took his hand. Then we helped each other. My family's story helped you, and you've given me the chance to face it, to reclaim it, to find peace with it. There's something else I want to show you, Dennis said. He stood and walked to the back door, gesturing for her to follow. Together, they walked outside toward the well that had held her family's secrets for so long. They stood before the well in the late afternoon light, autumn leaves drifting down around them. Sheila touched the stone with both hands, as if feeling for a pulse, for some remnant of the past embedded in the ancient rock. My mother stood here, she said quietly, the night she buried everything. I watched from my bedroom window. I was 15 years old, and I watched her kneel by this well in the rain, crying silently. I didn't understand what she was doing. I just knew it was important, sacred somehow. Dennis waited, letting her process the memory. I wanted to go down to her to help her, but something stopped me. The way she was moving, so deliberate, so careful, it felt like a ritual I wasn't supposed to interrupt. So I just watched until she went back inside. We never talked about it. Not that night, not ever, until she was dying. Sheila looked up at Dennis, her face wet with tears. She told me about the well 3 weeks before she passed. Said she'd buried our family's truth because she couldn't carry it anymore, but couldn't destroy it either. She made me promise something. What? That if anyone ever found it, I wouldn't be angry. That I'd understand she was trying to honor what we'd been, not erase it. Sheila's voice broke. She said our family deserved to be remembered as whole people, not just as a failure. Dennis thought of Patricia's voice on the tape. We were never nothing. She was right, he said. Your family wasn't a failure. You were real people dealing with real illness, real pain. And you survived. You adapted. That's not failure, that's courage. Sheila nodded, fresh tears falling. I need to do something. I've been thinking about it since I got your email, and now that I'm here, I know it's right. What is it? I want to create something new. Take some of the original items, the ones I want to keep personally, but leave something here too. A new time capsule. A completion of the conversation my parents started. Dennis felt his chest tighten with emotion. What would you put in it? Letters. To my younger self, to my parents, to my brother. She paused, her voice catching. Kevin died in 2019. Overdose. He struggled with addiction most of his adult life. I think he carried our family's pain differently than I did. He couldn't put it down. I'm so sorry. He tried so hard. Got sober multiple times, relapsed multiple times. In his good periods, he was wonderful, funny, kind, present. But the demons always came back. She wiped her eyes. I want to leave something for him here. An acknowledgement that he mattered, that his struggle mattered, that he was loved. That's beautiful, Dennis said. And I want to leave something for whoever finds this next. In another 20 years, another 40. Someone else who needs to know that families survive, that pain doesn't last forever, that healing is possible. Would you? Dennis hesitated. Would you mind if I added something too? A letter to my own children, to my future self. The Brenner's story has changed my life. I'd like to be part of its continuation. Sheila smiled through her tears. I'd be honored. We'll do it together. They spent the rest of Saturday afternoon and evening creating the new time capsule. Sheila wrote letters at Dennis's kitchen table while he prepared dinner. She wrote to her teenage self, forgiving that girl's confusion and fear. She wrote to her mother, thanking her for the preservation, understanding finally why it had been necessary. She wrote to her father, telling him his redemption story had meant everything. And she wrote to Kevin, a goodbye letter filled with love and acceptance. Dennis wrote too, a letter to Laurel and Trevor, promising to stay present, to keep reaching out, to never let distance become disconnection. A letter to his former wife, thanking her for the years they'd shared and wishing her happiness. And a letter to whoever would find this collection next, passing forward the gift the Brenners had given him. They selected items carefully. Sheila kept most of the photographs, her father's birthday tape to Kevin, her mother's letters. But she left significant pieces behind. Her own unsent letter to her father, some family photos, Patricia's tape explaining the well, and Richard's 2003 message. To these, they added their new letters, recent photographs, Sheila's family, Dennis's children, and a joint statement explaining what they'd done and why. Sunday morning, Mrs. Keller came over with fresh cookies as promised. Mr. Bachman joined them, moving slowly but determinedly. The four of them stood together by the well as Sheila and Dennis lowered the new container into the darkness. It settled with a soft sound, completion, not burial. Mr. Bachman spoke first. "Your family was loved here, Sheila. I want you to know that. We didn't understand what was happening, but we cared about you all." "Thank you," Sheila said, embracing the old man. "That means more than you know." Mrs. Keller presented the cookies because people always feel better with something sweet, and they stood together in the autumn morning. An impromptu wake for a family long gone, but not forgotten. Before they sealed the well completely, Sheila knelt beside it one more time. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for holding our story, for keeping us safe until we were ready to remember." Then she stood, nodded to Dennis, and together they replaced the heavy wooden cover. The well was sealed again, holding its new secrets, waiting for the next person who would need to hear that healing was possible, that families survived, that pain eventually transformed into peace. Sheila turned to Dennis, her face peaceful for the first time since arriving. "I'm ready to go inside now. To really talk, to tell you about my father's final years, about my mother's second marriage, about how we all found our way forward." They walked back to the house together, two people connected by grief and hope, ready to share stories of survival. 3 months later, the first snow of winter fell on Willow Creek Lane. Dennis stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the white flakes settle on the bare branches of the oak trees. The well in his front yard was barely visible under its blanket of snow, peaceful and silent, holding its secrets gently. His phone buzzed with a text from Sheila. "Thinking about you today. Hope you're staying warm. The kids want to visit in the spring. They're fascinated by the house and the well story." Dennis smiled and responded, "You're all welcome anytime. This house has plenty of room for family." Family. The word had taken on new meaning these past months. Sheila had stayed that entire Sunday after they sealed the well, and they'd talked for hours. She'd told him about her father's final years, how Richard had remained sober, stayed in therapy, built a genuine relationship with his stepdaughter, how he'd attended Sheila's wedding, met his grandchildren, been present in ways he'd been unable to achieve during her childhood. He never stopped carrying guilt, Sheila had said. But he learned to carry it differently, not as a weight that crushed him, but as a reminder to stay conscious, to keep choosing health, to never take connection for granted. She told him about her mother too, Patricia's second marriage to a kind man who'd loved her without trying to erase her past. How Patricia had worked at the library until retirement, always surrounded by stories, always finding meaning in the narratives of others' lives. She told me once that burying those memories in the well was the hardest and most necessary thing she'd ever done, Sheila had said. She called it loving release, letting go without destroying, honoring without clinging. And she'd told him about Kevin, the brother who'd struggled, who'd fought addiction with courage even when he lost the battles, who'd loved fiercely in his sober moments and suffered deeply in his dark ones. "Kevin taught me that healing isn't linear," Sheila had said, tears in her eyes, "that sometimes survival means trying again and again, even when you fail. He never gave up trying right until the end. That's its own kind of bravery." Dennis had shared his own story too, the slow erosion of his marriage, the divorce that had been necessary but painful, the months of drifting afterward. How finding the Brenner's artifacts had woken him up, shown him what not to do, given him courage to reconnect. They'd exchanged contact information, promised to stay in touch. And they had. Weekly emails at first, then regular phone calls. Sheila had become not just a connection to the house's history, but a genuine friend, someone who understood grief and healing, who spoke the language of survival. The relationship with his own children had transformed too. Laurel visited once a month now, staying the weekend, filling the house with her presence and laughter. They'd fallen into new traditions, cooking together, taking walks through the neighborhood, talking about real things instead of surface pleasantries. Trevor had come for Thanksgiving, bringing his girlfriend to meet Dennis for the first time. They'd spent 3 days together, and Dennis had been fully present. Not the ghost version of himself, but actually engaged, interested, alive. "You're different, Dad," Trevor had said before leaving. "Lighter somehow. Like you've put down something heavy you'd been carrying." Dennis had thought about that observation often. He had put something down, not the past itself, but the shame and isolation it had carried. The Brenners had taught him that acknowledging pain didn't mean being consumed by it. That family could survive transformation. That second chances were built, not granted. He'd become part of the neighborhood too. Regular coffee with Mr. Backman every Thursday morning. Helping Mrs. Keller with her garden in preparation for winter. Babysitting for the Prestons when they needed a date night. The street that had felt like a collection of strangers now felt like a community. The house itself had transformed from a refuge into a home. Dennis had painted the guest room, fixed the porch, cleared the overgrown areas around the well. He'd hung photos of his children on the walls, filled the bookshelf with volumes he actually read, created a space that reflected who he was becoming rather than who he'd been. The well remained the heart of it all, not ominous anymore, but sacred. A reminder that every life held depths unseen, that beneath the surface of ordinary houses lay extraordinary stories, that pain preserved with love could transform into healing. Dennis had written about the experience in his journal, which he kept faithfully now. He documented his own transformation, his reconnections, his daily gratitude. Perhaps someday, someone would read these entries and find meaning in them, just as he'd found meaning in the Brenners' preserved memories. On Christmas morning, Laurel and Trevor video-called together, their faces appearing side by side on his screen. They'd coordinated without telling him, wanting to see his reaction. "Merry Christmas, Dad," they said in unison, grinning. Dennis felt his eyes fill with tears, the good kind, the kind that came from fullness rather than emptiness. "Merry Christmas, my loves. You have no idea what this means." "We do, actually," Laurel said softly. "You've shown us. By showing up, by staying present, by letting us back in." After the call ended, Dennis walked outside despite the cold. Snow crunched under his feet as he approached the well, now marked with a small plaque he'd installed. A family remembered, 1982-2025. He stood there in the winter morning, thinking about the Brenners, Richard, Patricia, Sheila, Kevin, about their pain and their survival, about how their story had reached across decades to save him from his own slow disappearance. "Thank you," he whispered to the well, to the family it held, to whatever force had led him to this house at exactly the right moment in his life. The well remained silent, but Dennis felt the answer in his bones. Healing was possible. Families survived in new forms, and sometimes the greatest gift we could give each other was simply the truth of our struggles and our survival. He turned and walked back toward his house, smoke rising from the chimney, lights warm in the windows. The promise of another day stretched before him. Not perfect, not without challenges, but genuine, present, alive. He was home.